The silent throne room, the throne room of the alien queen, was the largest hall in the entire palace. It was built from black stone that shone like glass, cold and smooth under the dim light. Tall pillars reached high to the ceiling, each carved with strange alien shapes that seemed to watch anyone who entered. The air was heavy and still, as if even the air itself was afraid to move. The alien queen sat upon her throne at the far end of the hall. Her throne was made from the bones of creatures long dead, creatures she had defeated with her own claws. Her crown glimmered with red jewels that caught the faint light and made them look like drops of blood. Her long tail rested lazily beside her, but everyone knew it could strike faster than lightning. Her eyes were narrow, sharp, and full of a cold light that made even the bravest warriors bow their heads. Around her stood her court, alien leaders, warriors and advisors from many worlds. They all stood in silence, afraid to speak unless she gave them permission. Every face was careful, every movement slow, because one mistake could mean death. The queen ruled not with kindness, but with fear. And fear was a chain stronger than any metal. At the center of the room, two tall guards in silver armor dragged in a prisoner. He was human, dressed in a torn uniform, his wrists bound by glowing cuffs. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy. A small race from a small world. Most aliens thought humans were weak, too fragile to survive in the cold emptiness of space. But this one walked with his back straight, even with the heavy cuffs on his wrists. The guards shoved him to the center of the room and stepped back. He looked up at the throne, his face calm, his eyes steady. The queen tilted her head slightly, studying him like a scientist might study a strange insect. A faint hiss escaped her throat, the kind of sound that made others freeze. No one in the court dared to speak. The silence was so deep that the faint hum of the palace energy walls could be heard. Every alien present was thinking the same thing. The human would beg for his life. That was what everyone did when standing before the alien queen. Begging, promising, surrendering. And then perhaps if she was in a good mood, she might let them live. But the human did not kneel. He stood still, his eyes never leaving hers. The queen leaned forward on her throne, her long claws tapping against the armrest. "You are human," she said, her voice soft but carrying to every corner of the hall. "Your kind is small, fragile, and easily broken." Her words hung in the air like a trap. "What do you have to say before I end?" "Your life?" Gasps rippled through the court. This was her way. She offered one chance to speak. Most used that chance to cry for mercy. But the human's voice, when it came, was calm and clear. "I will speak," he said, "but not to beg." The court shifted uneasily. The queen's eyes narrowed. Her tail gave a slow, warning twitch. In all the years she had ruled, no one had ever dared to speak to her like this. She had destroyed entire cities for less, and yet this human stood, his voice steady, his face unshaken. "You have ruled with fear," the human continued. "You have silenced worlds, crushed leaders, and broken hope. But fear is not forever. Fear can be broken." Every word was like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through the court. The queen's lips curved into a slow, dangerous smile. "Interesting," she said. "You think you can break my rule with words?" Her voice was smooth, but there was an edge under it, the edge of a blade. The human's gaze did not waver. "Words can be stronger than chains," he said. "Even you know this, or you would not fear them." The court froze. It was as if the entire room had stopped breathing. The queen rose from her throne, tall and terrible, her shadow stretching across the floor. Every alien in the room lowered their eyes. They could feel the storm coming. The queen stepped down from the throne, her claws clicking on the stone floor. She moved slowly, circling the human. Her eyes studied every line of his face. "You are brave," she said at last. "But bravery is useless when you are dead." The human said nothing. His silence was louder than any scream. The queen stopped in front of him, so close that the air between them seemed to vibrate. The hall was utterly still. No one knew if the next sound would be her voice, or the sound of his death. "Speak," the queen said, her voice low and dangerous. "Speak your last words." The human looked into her eyes, and then, with a voice that carried to every corner of the room, he said, "Your reign of fear will end." The human's calm eyes, the throne room was still. Every alien, every guard, every advisor stood frozen in place. The words the human had just spoken hung in the air like a blade. "Your reign of fear will end." No one had ever dared speak such words to the alien queen. To defy her was to invite death, and yet this human did not shake. His eyes were steady, calm, and filled with something strange, something that was not fear. It was a look the queen had seen before, long ago, from enemies who believed they could win. The alien queen tilted her head, studying him like a predator studying unusual prey. Her tail swayed behind her, slow and dangerous. The jewels in her crown caught the dim light, making her look both majestic and deadly. But the human didn't lower his gaze. He met her stare without flinching, as if the weight of her power meant nothing to him. The court began to murmur softly, small whispers, nervous and curious, moving through the crowd like ripples in water. They could not understand it. How could a human, one of the smallest and weakest species in the known galaxy, stand against her so boldly? Some thought he was mad, others wondered if there was something more. The queen took a slow step closer. Her shadow stretched across the polished black floor until it touched his boots. "You speak with such confidence," she said softly. "Do you think you are the first to challenge me?" Her voice was like silk over steel, beautiful, but sharp enough to cut. The human's lips curled in the smallest hint of a smile. "I don't need to be the first," he said, his voice even. "I just need to be the one who does not stop." A guard shifted uncomfortably at his side, his armored boots clicking on the stone. The queen's eyes flicked toward the sound, and the guard quickly froze again. The silence returned, heavy and oppressive, but the human seemed untouched by it. The queen's claws tapped against the floor as she circled him slowly. Her movements were deliberate, each step measured, like a cat circling its prey before the final strike. She stopped behind him, close enough that he could feel the faint, cold air of her breath on the back of his neck. "Tell me, human," she said, her voice now low, dangerous. "What makes you so certain you can speak to me this way?" He did not turn to look at her. Instead, he raised his head and said, "Because I am not here for myself." The words stirred confusion in the crowd. The queen's eyes narrowed. "Then for who?" she asked, her tone mocking. "For every voice you have silenced," he said. "For every world that has lived in fear because of you." The murmurs in the court grew louder. The queen's tail lashed once, striking the floor with a sharp crack, and the room fell silent again. "You think words will protect you," she said, her voice now carrying a hint of amusement. "They will not." The human finally turned his head, meeting her gaze over his shoulder. "They will not protect me," he said, "but they will outlive you." A shiver seemed to pass through the court. It was not fear, not exactly. It was something else, something new. The queen stepped back, her expression unreadable. The human turned fully to face her again, still bound, still unarmed, yet somehow unbroken. "You rule with fear," he said, his voice strong enough to carry to the farthest corners of the room. "But fear is a fragile crown. It breaks when enough people see through it." The queen tilted her head again, but this time her eyes were not just cold, they were curious. She had faced warriors with weapons, armies with ships, assassins in the dark. But she had never faced a human with only words, and she had never seen those words begin to crack the silence of her court. She gave a slow, dangerous smile. "If you wish to test your words," she said, "then speak. Speak until you run out of breath." The human nodded once, and when he spoke again, his voice was like a spark in the darkness, a spark that might become a fire. Cliffhanger to part 3. The first sentence he spoke made half the court gasp and made the queen's smile fade. Shock in the court, the moment the human's first sentence left his mouth. The entire throne room seemed to change. The air felt sharper, heavier, as if the very walls were holding their breath. His words were simple, yet they carried a weight that none could ignore. "You are not as strong as you pretend to be," he said. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Some covered their mouths. Others stepped back in disbelief. It was not only dangerous to speak to the alien queen like this, it was unthinkable. The queen's tail froze mid-sway, her golden eyes narrowing into slits for a brief second. The silence was so deep that even the hum of the palace's energy walls faded from awareness. The human's gaze never wavered. He stood like a statue, his hands still bound, his voice calm. "You control them with fear," he continued, motioning with his chin toward the gathered alien nobles. "You make them bow, make them whisper, make them obey without question, but I see their eyes." The queen's lips curved into a slow smile, but there was no warmth in it. "You see nothing," she said, her tone smooth but edged with steel. "I see doubt," the human replied. "I see it in them now." That made the murmurs return. Soft at first, like distant wind, but they grew louder, flowing through the court like an unseen tide. Several alien nobles shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet the queen's gaze. One of her ministers, a tall insectoid being with glistening black eyes, twitched his mandibles nervously. The queen turned her head toward him, and instantly his gaze dropped to the floor. Her eyes swept the hall like a blade, cutting through the whispers. But something had changed. The fear was still there, yet it was no longer perfect. It had been cracked, and everyone could feel it. The human's words were like water dripping onto stone. Slow, constant, impossible to stop. The queen took one slow step down from the throne. Each step echoed against the polished black floor. She moved until she stood only a few paces from him, towering over his frame. She bent her head slightly so her eyes were level with his. "You think they will rise for you?" she asked. "They will not. I do not ask them to rise for me," the human said. "I ask them to rise for themselves." The crowd's whispers grew again, this time faster. The queen's tail lashed, striking the floor with a loud crack that silenced them instantly. She circled him once, her eyes never leaving his. "Every rebel, every voice, every fool who thought they could stand against me is gone," she said, her voice low and sharp. "I have ruled for longer than your people have seen the stars. Then, perhaps you have forgotten what it means to be challenged," the human replied. That sentence hit the court like a shockwave. One alien gasped so loudly that it drew the queen's glare. She held the stare for a moment, then returned her focus to the human. Her smile was gone now, replaced with something colder. It was not pure rage. It was the look of someone deciding whether their enemy was dangerous enough to keep alive. A little longer, the human tilted his head slightly. "You know something, don't you?" he said quietly, his tone not mocking but curious. "You know that all it takes is one moment, one spark, for fear to burn away." The queen's claws flexed at her sides, her tail curling and uncurling like a whip. "You will not be that spark," she said. Her voice was calm, but the tightness in her movements betrayed the truth. His words had touched something deep. The court felt it too. Some looked at the queen with the same fear as always, but others now looked at the human with something new, something like hope. And hope was dangerous in a place ruled by fear. The queen stepped back toward her throne. "Enough of your words," she said. But there was no finality in it. "If you wish to speak, you will speak to my face in the trial of tongues." Gasps rippled through the crowd again. The trial of tongues was an ancient custom, rarely invoked. It was a public contest where words, not weapons, decided the fate of the accused. Few survived it, because those who failed were executed on the spot. The human did not flinch. "I will speak," he said simply. The queen gave a slow nod, her gaze hard. "Then prepare, human," she said, "for your voice will be your only weapon." The challenge, the words trial of tongues still echoed in the throne room, long after the queen spoke them. The court stood in stunned silence, their eyes shifting between the queen and the human. It was an ancient custom, older than most of the species present. Few had ever seen it, and even fewer had survived it. The trial was not about strength of arms or skill with weapons. It was about words, but in the queen's empire, words could be just as deadly as any blade. One wrong sentence, one misstep, and the challenger would be executed instantly. Victory was not about convincing the queen, for she never truly listened. It was about shaking her control, breaking the fear that kept her court loyal. The queen's golden eyes locked onto the human. "You will face me before the suns rise twice," she said, her voice low and heavy. "You will speak until either you break, or I do." The human did not look away. "I understand," he replied, his voice calm. The words were simple, but in that moment, they carried more weight than the stone pillars holding the hall. Two guards stepped forward, their armor gleaming. In the dim light, they seized the human by the arms, pulling him away from the center of the room. The court watched in complete silence as he was led out. The queen returned to her throne, but her eyes followed him until the great doors closed. The holding cell was not large. It was carved into the palace itself, the walls smooth and cold. A faint hum came from the force field sealing the entrance. The human sat on the single stone bench, his hands still bound. He knew the queen had not chosen the trial to be merciful. She had chosen it to humiliate him before killing him. And yet, he felt no fear. His mind was already turning over the possible ways to speak. Not to insult her, that would be easy, but to make her doubt. Doubt was the one enemy fear could never stand against. From the shadows at the edge of the cell, a figure stepped forward. It was a servant, a thin alien with pale gray skin and large black eyes. She bowed her head slightly and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "No one survives the trial," she said. The human looked at her, but she didn't meet his eyes. "They all try, they all fail," she continued. Her voice is like a storm, her mind like steel. "Steel can rust," the human said quietly. The servant flinched, glancing nervously toward the door. "You speak as if you want to win," she said. "But victory means more than your life. It means the queen's power will begin to crack. That is why I must win," he said. Simply, the servant's black eyes studied him for a long moment. Then she stepped closer and whispered, "She hates one thing more than rebellion. She hates the truth she cannot change." The human listened carefully. "That I will find that truth," he said, "and I will speak it where all can hear." When the next day came, the trial was announced across the palace. Banners were hung. In the central chamber where it would take place, the chamber was even larger than the throne room, with tiered seats rising high above the central floor. Already it was filling with beings from across the empire, nobles, warriors, merchants, spies, all eager to witness the rare spectacle. The queen entered first, her presence sending a shiver through the crowd. She wore ceremonial armor this time, black and gold, the edges shaped like the fangs of a predator. She took her place on a raised platform, her eyes scanning the audience like a hunter looking over prey. The human was brought in next, his cuffs removed but his wrists still red from their grip. He walked to the center of the chamber and stood tall. The crowd murmured softly, surprised. At his calm posture, the queen raised one clawed hand and the room fell silent instantly. "This is the trial of tongues," she announced. "This human has dared to speak against me. To claim my reign of fear will end. He will now prove his words before all who are loyal to me." She leaned forward, her gaze like a spear. "If he fails, his voice will be silenced forever." The human's voice carried clearly across the chamber. "Then let us begin," he said. The queen smiled, slow and cold. "Tell me, human," she began, "what gives your kind the right to speak in the halls of rulers?" The chamber went quiet, every ear waiting for his answer. He knew this was her opening strike, a question meant to make him stumble, to show the crowd his weakness. But he took a breath, and when he spoke, his words were steady. "We speak. Not because we are rulers," he said. "We speak because we are free." The crowd stirred. The queen's eyes narrowed just slightly. The trial had begun. The power shift. The queen's question had been sharp, but the human's answer had cut deeper than she expected. The crowd still murmured softly, the words "we speak because we are free" echoing in their minds. Free. It was a word that did not belong in her empire, a word most had not dared to think for years. The queen's eyes narrowed, and she leaned forward slightly. Her next question came like a sudden strike. "Do you think freedom is stronger than power?" she asked, her voice carrying a dangerous softness. The human did not look away. "I think freedom is the only power worth having," he replied without hesitation. A ripple passed through the chamber. The nobles shifted in their seats, some exchanging quick glances. The guards standing along the walls gripped their weapons tighter. The queen's tail flicked once, striking the air like a whip. "Bold words," she said. "But words do not keep planets safe. Fear keeps them safe." She continued, "Fear keeps order." The human took a slow step forward, closing the space between them by only a fraction. "Fear does not keep order," he said, his voice calm but carrying. "Fear only keeps people quiet until they find the courage to speak." The queen's jaw tightened ever so slightly. Her voice came lower now, meant to cut through his composure. "Do you believe you can give them courage?" The human's answer was simple. "I believe I already have." The queen's gaze swept the room. She was searching for any sign that his words were affecting her court. But she saw something she did not like. Eyes that should have been lowered were watching the human instead, and worse, some were watching with something close to belief. This was the danger she had always feared, not an army, not an assassin, but an idea that spread faster than she could crush it. An idea carried on the voice of a single defiant human. She tried to strike back, her words like claws. "Your kind is small, scattered, weak," she said. "You survive only when stronger races protect you. You speak as if humanity has shaped the galaxy, but you are nothing compared to my rule." The human's reply came without pause. "We may be small," he said, "but we are not nothing. We may be scattered, but we find each other. And we do not need to shape the galaxy, only to stand when it matters." There was a sudden stillness in the room. The words landed heavier than the queen expected. For a moment, her court was not thinking of her power or her conquests. They were thinking of their own chains, their own silences. The queen rose from her platform, stepping down toward the human. Her presence was overwhelming, her height casting a long shadow over him. But he did not step back. Instead, he met her eyes. And for the first time, there was something different in her gaze, a flicker, almost too quick to catch. The trial continued. Question after question. She tried to corner him with logic, trap him with contradictions, twist his words into weakness. But each time, he answered not with the arrogance of a challenger, but with the calm of someone who believed what he said. His voice never rose, but it carried to every corner of the chamber. His words were not just for her. They were for all who listened. "Why do you risk death for this?" she asked finally, her tone now edged with something strange. "Because if I do not speak now," he said, "then there will be no one left to speak at all." A noble in the upper tiers shifted forward in his seat, eyes locked on the human. A guard at the far wall adjusted his grip on his weapon, but did not seem as certain as before. It was small, almost invisible, but the queen felt it, the shift. The balance of the room was no longer entirely in her control. The queen stepped close enough that her voice was for him alone. "You are clever," she whispered, "but cleverness will not save you." The human's reply was quiet, but it carried enough weight to shake her. "It's not cleverness that will save me," he said. "It's the truth." She stepped back, her tail curling in slow, tense movements. The crowd was still silent, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of listening, and that silence belonged to him now as much as to her. The breaking point, the words came from somewhere high in the court. He is right. It was not loud, but it was clear enough for everyone to hear. A single voice in a place where no one had dared speak against the queen for generations. Heads turned toward the source. A tall alien noble with silver skin and dark, unblinking eyes. His expression was calm, but there was a tremor in his voice. The tremor of someone stepping into danger for the first time. The queen's gaze snapped to him instantly. The air in the chamber grew heavy. The silver-skinned noble lowered his head, but he did not take back his words. It was only a moment, yet it was enough. The human looked around the chamber and saw it. A ripple moving through the crowd. It was not noise, not yet, but a shift in posture, in breathing. The kind of change that happens when people begin to think they are not alone in their thoughts. The queen's tail lashed once, a sharp warning that cracked through the air. Her voice came like thunder. Who dares agree with this outsider? She demanded. The noble said nothing more, but others looked away quickly, afraid her eyes might find them next. The queen turned back to the human. You see? She said coldly. One weak voice is nothing. The human's reply came without hesitation. One voice becomes two, he said. Two become 10, and 10 become 1,000. The queen's claws curled slowly. You think numbers will save you? She asked. They will not. They will, he answered. Because you cannot silence all of them forever, for the first time. Her lips drew back to reveal her teeth. Not in a smile, but in a snarl. The chamber felt smaller now. The tension thick as smoke. She took a slow step toward him, and the crowd held its breath. You speak as if you have already won, she said. I speak because winning is not the point, he replied. It's speaking that all that matters. That line struck deeper than any challenge before it. Some in the audience shifted forward in their seats, drawn in as if the words pulled them closer. Even the guards, trained to be statues, seemed less rigid now. The queen's voice dropped. Lower, almost a hiss. You believe you can take my throne with your mouth? The human shook his head slowly. I don't want your throne, he said. I want you to hear the truth you've buried for so long. The queen tilted her head, eyes narrowing. And what truth is that? That even you, he said, are afraid. The words landed like a blow. The court gasped, and a wave of whispers swept through the chamber. Fear of the queen was one thing, but to suggest she felt fear was something no one had dared to speak before. The queen's tail struck the floor hard enough to make the stone crack. Her voice rose, sharper than any blade. I fear nothing, she growled. The human didn't flinch. That's the lie you tell them, he said quietly. But I see it in you. The silence that followed was dangerous. The kind of silence where everyone knows something irreversible has been said. The queen's jaw tightened. Her eyes locked on him. The chamber seemed to sway between two possibilities. Either she would strike him down now, or something even greater would happen. Then, from the far side of the room, another voice spoke. You are not the only one who sees it. Gasps erupted again. It was a different noble this time, a broad, scaled alien with a deep voice that carried across the chamber. He met the queen's gaze, and for a heartbeat, neither looked away. The queen's control was cracking. Her rule had been built on absolute silence. And now there were two voices in the same trial, two voices that dared to speak in her presence. She could feel the shift like a storm building on the horizon. She turned back to the human, her voice low but dangerous. You are walking a path you will not return from, she said. He answered calmly. Then I will walk it to the end. The queen's tail coiled tightly, her claws flexed. The air in the chamber felt electric. Something was going to break, either her control or his life. The last word, the queen's shadow stretched over the human like a dark tide. She stood close enough that he could feel the cold air shift with her every breath. The chamber was alive with silent energy. Hundreds of eyes locked on the space. Between them, no one spoke, no one moved. It was as if the galaxy itself had paused to see who would break first. "You have pushed far enough," the Queen said, her voice low and sharp. "One more word and it will be your last." The human's expression didn't change. His eyes were calm, his posture steady. He looked at her as if she were not the most feared ruler in the galaxy, but simply another voice that could be answered. "If it must be my last," he said softly, "then I will make it worth saying." The Queen's eyes narrowed. "You speak as if death does not frighten you." "It doesn't," he said, "not as much as silence." The words rippled through the court. They were simple, but they carried a weight that pressed on every listener's chest. Even the guards, loyal, disciplined, unshakable, felt their grip on their weapons loosen. The Queen straightened, drawing herself to her full height. "You think your words have power here," she said, her voice growing louder. "They have none. I hold power." The human took a slow step forward, closing the space between them to barely an arm's length. "You hold control," he said. "But control is not the same as power." A flicker passed through her golden eyes. It was quick, almost invisible, but the court saw it. It was doubt. And doubt was the one thing her rule could not survive. "You will not change this empire with your mouth," she said, her voice sharper now. "Perhaps not," he replied. "But I can change it with my voice." "Your people will forget you," she said coldly. "They will remember me," he answered. "Because I spoke when they could not." The Queen's tail twitched, striking the floor with a sharp crack. The sound echoed, but it no longer silenced the crowd the way it once had. Instead, whispers began to spread, small at first, then growing. The nobles whispered to one another. The guards glanced at each other. The air felt different now. Something was shifting. Something dangerous to her. "You are one human," she said. "One is enough," he replied. The Queen studied him for a long moment, her gaze cold and calculating. She could end this here, in one swift movement. She could silence him forever. But she could feel the eyes of the court on her. If she killed him now, the words he had spoken would not die. They would grow, and if she let him live, the defiance would spread even faster. It was the choice she had never wanted to face. And this human had forced it on her. The Queen stepped back slowly. Her voice, when it came, was softer but heavier than before. "Leave my sight," she said. It was not mercy, not surrender. It was a command given by someone who knew that killing him would not be victory. The guards moved forward, but not with the same sharpness as before. They escorted him toward the great doors. The human walked with his head high, his step steady. He did not look back. Before the doors opened, he stopped and turned slightly, his voice carrying across the chamber. "You will not rule forever," he said. "Not while one voice dares to speak." The chamber froze. The Queen's eyes locked on him. For a moment, no one breathed. Then the doors opened, and he stepped through, disappearing into the light beyond. The court remained silent. Some still looked at the Queen, others stared at the empty doorway, and in that silence, something unspoken passed between them all, a truth that could not be unseen. The first seed had been planted, somewhere deep inside her. The Queen knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning.